Hi there, Lynn Cox, clinical hypnotherapist, helping women who have gotten out of domestic abusive violent relationships. My little doggy's sitting up behind me here. And also helping people recover from some of the most common symptoms of childhood abuse. So I'm doing the follow-up video today to a post that I put up about rather than saying it's not my fault or it wasn't my fault, try instead it was his fault, or it is his fault, or it is her fault, or it is or was their fault. If that's the case, perhaps that you had abusive parents or neglectful parents, if it's a them, or if you had more than one person commit any kind of act of violence. And then I said, I'm going to talk about how the mind works, how we interpret language, and how critically important language is. Because I'm going to be really honest, when people are coming out of a situation of having been in a violent, abusive relationship, and or recovering from symptoms of childhood abuse, like in adulthood, having issues with relationships, having issues with intimacy, having issues with family if it was within the family unit, having self-esteem issues, addiction issues, going through deciding how they're going to address and hopefully move through any impacts from that abuse. Often what people will say is, you know what, it wasn't your fault. I mean, in the case of a child, it wasn't their fault, regardless of what happened. And the same is when women are in an abusive relationship. When we are adults and do some reflection upon those types of relationships, it can sometimes be clear to see, okay, I can see maybe what was going on with me that either allowed me to, respond from my more primitive brain to be in that situation, or why it was familiar. But the reason why I emphasize this, not my fault, is for a few reasons. So, first of all, rule of the mind only responds to words and pictures, and the words create the pictures. Our subconscious mind, which is where our beliefs are held, this is where the deep emotional imprints get laid down. So, it doesn't speak as literally or understand language as literally as we do in our logical brain. So, a couple of things to that. The subconscious doesn't interpret the negative. So when I work with people and we go into regression, we go into a hypnotic state, go into regression where we can speak to the subconscious mind. That's where we unroot and figure out what's at the root cause of the presenting issue, the presenting symptom. And then we work to lay down a new track. It's really important that we don't say things like, I want to stop feeling anxious, or I don't want to feel anxious anymore, or I don't want to experience these feelings of stress and anxiety. Because what the subconscious mind is hearing is stress, anxiety, etc. So, from the perspective of course, it's a great message that no, it wasn't your fault. It's not your fault, to place the blame where the blame belongs, but a far more direct and impactful way for the mind to start to interpret that. Because when people go through these experiences, it is on their mind a lot. Depending on what stage they're at, it can sometimes feel like obsessive thoughts and how they're trying to work through it and get over it. So it's something that's going on continuously in their mind. And if they are repeatedly telling themselves it wasn't my fault, potentially what the subconscious is hearing is my fault, my fault, my fault, my fault, my fault. Versus, and this is a subtlety, and it may sound really minor, but to be honest, we really need to pay attention to the language that we're using and have just a little bit of an understanding of how the subconscious interprets and makes meaning. The mind also learns through repetition. It's really effective to receive repetitive, positive reinforcement and ideas when people are in a state of relaxed, focused awareness, which is a state of hypnosis, But even when people aren't in that state, repetitive messages, and particularly ones that hold a high emotional charge, the repetition and the emotion really makes things sink in. So from the perspective of it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my fault, or it isn't my fault, just flip it. Just flip it a little bit. And for anybody who is a friend or a family member or a therapist of somebody who's going through these things, be direct. Be really direct. No, it was and it is his fault, her fault, their fault. That's a lot more direct. And then you're not running the risk with the subconscious mind to just hear the my fault, my fault, my fault. It's the his fault, her fault. So that helps to kind of lift the emotion if it's something that's on the mind a lot and a thought that's recurring and something that people are trying to integrate and understand. Because also, a lot of people who have experienced childhood abuse as well as domestic violence often feel guilty and full of shame, and like somehow it was maybe their fault. That's something that kind of gets lodged into those subconscious beliefs, which is what we work on unrooting with a therapy like RTT hypnotherapy. So the language, it's a tweak, but just remembering that the subconscious doesn't hear that negative. So when I work with a client and we are working on creating a picture and a story, words and pictures. Remember, the mind responds to words and pictures. And even if you're not visual, don't worry, because the words create the pictures. It's not like you have to see it, like feel like you can see it. The words create the pictures. We always use positive, affirmative, present tense language because that's the language of the subconscious. So toss out the it wasn't my fault and instead direct the blame, because anybody who commits any kind of violence or abuse, they definitely are to blame. Just be really direct about it and have that message instead running through. So you're not potentially hearing that my fault, my fault, my fault, with the negative that the subconscious isn't really taking in. And, I have worked with a lot of clients as well who have struggled with shedding weight. That's actually also a symptom of people who have experienced trauma and abuse earlier in life. And a lot of people talk about lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. Another little language trick there. The mind it never wants to lose anything. To lose something is bad, and to lose something to the subconscious, it will try to get it back. So if you're in the place where you're trying to shed weight, maybe stop using that phrase with yourself. I have to lose weight. I have to stop eating chocolate. So shed weight, pounds melt away, slimming down. These are just, again, they're subtleties, but as humans in our subconscious, we are very much impacted by language and repetitive messages. So you can change the language. You can change those words, change those pictures through repetition and through some focused attention. You can really make some change. So if it's a weight issue, try to do away with the lose weight and instead replace it with shed weight, be lighter, feel stronger, pounds melt away, messages like that. And if it's particular food that you're having a struggle with binging on, rather than stop eating chocolate cake or stop eating cookies, instead try something like, what would a flip side of that would be, eating food that is healthy, nourishing, whole foods, high protein. Flip it to the positive. And if you're dealing with trying to heal from abuse, violence, child abuse, absolutely know that you're not to blame. But flip that language. If that's something you feel that you have to remind yourself of, or something that you hear from friends, family, a therapist, just tweak it. No, it's much more directive. It's much more directive. And then from that perspective, it will seep into the subconscious in a way that you'd probably more want it to. So rather than hearing a repetitive my fault, my fault, my fault. So that's all I have to say about that. It may sound like a very, it may sound like almost like a not that important thing to pay attention to, but we really have to pay attention to the words and the pictures that go in there, because that on a repetitive basis can really help people through their healing and recovery processes. So I hope everyone's having a great day, and I'll be back on tomorrow. Bye for now.